This week on Destination Whitetail, we are in North Dakota to visit a homemade hunting paradise.
I planted 100,000 trees roughly through the soil conservation.
Now how far all the way across towards does that your property go?
It runs a half mile.
Half mile?
All the way to that bean field.
Wow.
Aim small, think small, shoot small.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Then we find out about the area's once hidden secrets.
They're responsible for 10 nuclear missiles. They're each indicated. They each have their own separate columns. See, the floor doesn't touch the wall, so it's got the ability to kind of, swing and shift. This equipment building was protected by a 13-ton blast door. It's a monster.
Welcome to Destination Whitetail.
Look through the scope, take a bead on him. Plow! Gotta believe. There's enough wild game meat for all of us.
Hey y'all, I'm Brittany Glaze. Welcome to Destination Whitetail. This week, we're hunting in North Dakota. It's not known for its trendy lifestyle. Its state dance is square. It quietly protected us during the Cold War. And today, we're gonna learn how it's not only changing above ground for the whitetail, but below ground for us.
The rolling hills of North Dakota are a haven for many species of wildlife. But one man is responsible for a large stretch that is truly a paradise for whitetail. George Berger, a former corporate suit who's turned into a one-man hunting habitat-making machine.
We've expanded our properties over the years. Our first property we bought roughly in 1989. Since I've started, I've planted somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 trees, give or take.
North Dakota is kind of what I expected. It's a very open ground, but George's was different. I noticed right away he had all kinds of trees, and come to find out, George had planted just rows and rows of shelter belts.
It equates to roughly probably 60, 70 miles if you were to string it all out in one row belt. We're trying some new experimental things with the soil conservation. They scalp them in and they put down fabric. It's a lot easier. They don't grow quite as fast, but it's not as much work either. What I try to do is plant them in rows and shelter belts and make pinch points and try and funnel the deer to the pinch points.
To get a better idea of what's on the property, George uses trail cameras by feeders to try and get a better idea of the bucks moving through the food plots and pinch points.
Good to go.
What George does, his theory is kind of unique, is wherever they're going to bed or wherever they like to bed, he always puts a food plot fairly close to that source. So the first thing those deer do is when they get up, they're going to gravitate towards those food plots or the shooting plots and normally spend a little bit of time there. Time and time again, George had pictures of shooters' deer in every one of those food plots.
Started at 5. We did, right, he is in every. I think he likes his picture taken. Is it the same deer? I try and put them in the highly traveled areas or where there's pinch points where you see trails. And over the years, I've moved them a little bit here and there, just to kind of, zero in on them a little more.
The one thing that struck me was the sheer volume of food plots that George is putting in. He had big acreage of corn, and I was asking him, George, what's the thought process here? Because they're really not in the corn and they're coming up into the other plots. And he said that his area, those deer winter there. He goes, I'll have more than 100, 200 deer that will winter right in this area. And then he started pulling out pictures, and it was amazing how many deer that were utilizing his plot.
I want to have everyone have the capabilities or the possibility of harvesting something that's, halfway decent. And if I were to hunt myself, I would hunt the early hunt, or I would come in like December The elements aren't usually the best, but I have heated blinds. The deer are congregated on our property. Generally, they winter here because of the food source, and you'll see herds of deer.
Coming up on Destination Whitetail.
But I heard it bang through. Then I stuck second thinking myself whether it hit.
George is feeding 1,000 blackbirds.
I guess the main thing is I just enjoy seeing wildlife. That's the reason I do it.
Destination Whitetail is brought to you by Browning Trail Cameras, by Alps Outdoors, exceed your expectations, by Thompson Center, America's master gunmaker, by Nikon, the next generation in hunting optics, by Analogics, protect your herd with the power of science, and by Hornady, accurate, deadly, dependable.
Dakota, there's not a ton of structure, especially trees that warrant tree stands. Granted, George had a few tree stands hung, but he normally hunts out of ground blinds.
George puts the hunters in camp to work, placing new ground blinds on promising spots and clearing shooting lanes for the evening hunt.
He positioned these ground blinds right by the food source, be it a food plot or a feeder. The deer were so used to these things, they paid no attention to them whatsoever.
Turns out, deer are not the only species taking advantage of the feeders.
When you're sitting over a feeder, and I don't hunt over a feeder a lot, North Dakota it's legal, you always assume that deer are eating all the food, but literally between the squirrels and the birds, I don't know if that's truth or not, because they are in there all the time.
George is feeding 1,000 blackbirds. He thought a big buck was coming to the feeder. There they all go. They fly away and they come back. They just keep eating corn. I don't know if you can hear it, but they're actually on the roof of the blind. And that was just a little flock. There's tons more out there. Hopefully the next time they get scared, it's from a big deer coming into the field.
That strategy didn't work for us. We saw a number of deer, but it did for one of the other hunters in camp.
Oh, you pounded a perfect shot. What a pretty deer.
Paul shot a beautiful 10-point buck. It was his biggest deer with archery gear.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I remember what's on my case up there.
Yeah.
And it says, look, don't look at the horns all the time. Look at the body. Right to the side. Aim small. Think small. Shoot small. That's exactly what I did. But I heard it bang through. Then I stuck second thinking myself whether it hit. I thought maybe I missed him. I hit the trees.
Well, you're gonna mount him?
Damn right.
It just is so nice as a hunter to appreciate somebody else that appreciates harvesting a whitetail of that magnitude. It's something special just to be along on that trip.
Yep, you ready? Yeah. Pretty heavy.
He had a bad night.
He had a bad night.
I guess the main thing is I just enjoy seeing wildlife. I get more enjoyment out of driving around looking at it. It's a self-gratification. I mean, that's the reason I do it.
Well, George was obviously better at spotting game than I was, because I thought I saw a deer and grabbed a binocs in one chance, and then George grabbed his, and then we realized it was nothing. But You know, I think as you're trained to be out in that open country, you're going to spot wildlife a little bit better. It's always promising when you get in that vehicle and all of a sudden you see a big buck in the distance.
Coming up on Destination Whitetail.
One of the most unique things about that place is that it was part of the mission control.
From 1966 until 1998, the Air Force operated what they called the 321st Strategic Missile Wing. There was always at least 8 Air Force personnel located here waiting for something to happen, more or less.
One night over dinner, we were sitting there talking about the property, and George said one of the most unique things about that place is that it was part of the mission control.
One of our properties that we bought, there was a missile command center north of Cooperstown, and we never realized that it was even there when we purchased it.
Basically, a cable went through the middle of his property, kind of kitty corner, and it connected the control center to one of the silos. And this thing was this big around, full of copper. So it was all buried?
It was all buried.
Wow. How do you like to be an electrician that figured out how to hook that thing up to junction that? And then I started asking George questions like, how close were you to the control center? And next thing you know, he said, Cooperstown's just down the road. They still have one that's working, or a museum of the one that kind of made it into a destination, and we had to go see it.
In this part of North Dakota from 1966 until 1998, the Air Force operated what they called the 321st Strategic Missile Wing.
During the Cold War, this part of North Dakota was in the race to nuclear supremacy over the Soviet Union. Millions of dollars and millions of man-hours were used to create a larger arsenal to deter an attack, a strategy which ultimately paid off when the Soviet Union fell.
Each one of these 15 control facilities operated and controlled and would have been responsible for the launch of 10 nuclear missiles that were in their direct flight area.
You walked through the front door and it was like going back in time. Literally, the upstairs did kind of look like a normal house. You know, you had the bedrooms, a living room, and granted it was like going back into the early 80s, but everything was there. And when they left everything. I mean, they still had magazines there with their names on it when they shut this place down.
When the site was operational, there was always at least 8 Air Force personnel located here. They were composed of 6 security force members, a cook, and then a facility manager. On a 3-person team, one guy is the flight security controller. He's going to sit here for a 12-hour shift, and then his other 2 teammates are on what they call the response team. So they're the ones that are going to be, they're basically kind of sitting around, kind of like firefighters. They're waiting for something to happen, more or less.
But what was really cool is when you got to go downstairs below ground is where they housed the control center. And I'd never envisioned this before in my life, but what was really cool is first thing you get down there and they're telling you a little bit about it.
And there's the 2 structures down here. Behind me is the equipment building. It, again, basically got power and air next door to the control center.
And then they have the door.
This equipment building was protected by a 13-ton blast door.
Oh my God, that thing is unbelievable.
And when I say this is a door, it was 3 feet or 4 feet thick concrete. And when the door shuts, you're sealed in there.
Wow, it's a monster.
The precision of this door was unbelievable. I could move that door and it was like 30 tons or something like that, all by myself.
It's the biggest door I'll ever.
When you get into this area, everything was suspended from the floor with these huge shock absorbers.
See, the floor doesn't touch the wall. So it's got the ability to kind of, you know, swing and shift and move.
So if a missile would hit in that area, you're going to be cushioned from the blow.
So above the door here, you'll see that no loan zone two-person concept. What that means is the Air Force required that there were 2 certified launch officers inside that control center at all times. You know, they got the components that are used to launch nuclear weapons. They have top secret targeting information, plenty of other top secret information as well. So the Air Force didn't trust it with nobody. They didn't want it left alone, and they didn't want it left with just one person either. So basically from 1966 until the 17th of July, 1997, there were always 2 Air Force officers inside that control center.
Coming up on Destination Whitetail.
They each have their own separate column, so each column represents a different missile. And then each row represents a different status that any one of those missiles could be reporting.
Destination Whitetail is brought to you by Browning Trail Cameras, by Alps Outdoors, exceed your expectations, by Thompson Center, America's master gunmaker, by Nikon, the next generation in hunting optics, by Analogics, protect your herd with the power of science, and by Hornady, accurate, deadly, dependable.
See, this is one cable.
What was really interesting was the control panel where you actually launched the missiles.
The bulk of the work is happening right here at this panel. And this gives them the status of their missiles. They're responsible for 10 nuclear missiles. They're each indicated, they each have their own separate column, so each column represents a different missile. And then each row represents a different status that any one of those missiles could be reporting. You can see enabled, launch commanded, launch in process, and then missile away. So missile away is the last indication that the crew would receive that the missile had actually detached from its silo and was on its way. At that point, there's nothing that can be done. There's no self-destruct. You can't change its flight path. There's nothing of that sort. So once the crew has turned their keys down here to launch those missiles, they'll be on their way and striking targets within 30 minutes.
But the one thing that really stuck out on me is we're almost done with it, you know, with the tour. And I look up and I see this, like, you know, little circle thing, and it was painted, and there's words over by it. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he goes, that's an escape chute. If a missile was going to hit in this area, you know, basically you're going to live until your supplies are done. And you crawl up there and you open the door and let out all the sand that's in the tube, and then you crawl out. And I'm just thinking, okay, I just pushed the button that'll probably end the world. And now I'm going to crawl out to all of this radioactive activity. I mean, what kind of life is that? You might as well just give me a bullet so I can put it in my head, because I didn't want to get out of that thing.
And somebody at some point wrote on their abandoned hope, all ye who enter. Yeah.
Next week on Destination Whitetail, we head to Texas to test our skills and share the outdoors with those we love.
I see it all the time, people arguing about who's a better hunter and, you know, how you do this. Well, you know, you really want to test your skills at hunting, do it with a 4-year-old, because that will you know, that'll test you to your limit. But it's so rewarding that there's nothing like it.
Cactus heart. Cactus heart. Mean. And they ate all the corn. Papa, this is my life.
Key, when you want to get kids involved in the outdoors, is to involve them and make them part of the decision process. Should we go left or right? Should we go up this hill? Should we hunt this blind or this blind? What do you feel? I think that is the key, is getting them involved and trusting them with that decision is important to them. It gives them a lot of street cred for the outdoors, and they feel that and they get more confident with it.
Welcome to Destination Whitetail. I'm Brittany Glaze. I don't know why. I don't know if the lights are messing with me or what. I'm like going cross-eyed.